Gaul was a region of Western Europe during the Iron Age that was inhabited by Celtic tribes, encompassing present-day France, Luxembourg, Belgium, most of Switzerland, parts of northern Italy, as well as the parts of the Netherlands and Germany on the west bank of the Rhine. It covered an area of 190,800 square miles or 494,169 square kilometers. According to the testimony of Julius Caesar, Gaul was divided into three parts: Gallia Celtica, Belgica and Aquitania. Archaeologically, the Gauls were bearers of the Lateen culture, which extended across all of Gaul, as well as East Aricia, Noricum, Pannonia and southwestern Germania during the 5th to 1st centuries BC. During the 2nd and 1st centuries BC, Gaul fell under Roman rule. Gallia Cisalpina was conquered in 203 BC and Gallia Narbonensis in 123 BC. Gaul was invaded by the Cimbri and the Teutons after 120 BC, who were in turn defeated by the Romans by 103 BC. Julius Caesar finally subdued the remaining parts of Gaul in his campaigns of 58 to 51 BC. Roman control of Gaul lasted for 5 centuries, until the last Roman rump state, the domain of Soissons, fell to the Franks in AD 486. While the Celtic Gauls had lost their original identities and language during late antiquity, becoming amalgamated into a Gallo-Roman culture, Gallia remained the conventional name of the territory throughout the early Middle Ages, until it acquired a new identity as the Capetian Kingdom of France in the High Medieval period. Gallia remains a name of France in modern Greek and modern Latin. The Greek and Latin names Galatia and Gallia are ultimately derived from a Celtic ethnic term or clan Galtu. The Galli of Gallia Celtica were reported to refer to themselves as Celta by Caesar. Hellenistic folk etymology connected the name of the Galatians to the supposedly milk-white skin of the Gauls. The English Gaul is from French Gaul and is unrelated to Latin Gallia, despite superficial similarity. As adjectives, English has the two variants Gaulish and Gallic. The two adjectives are used synonymously, as pertaining to Gaul or the Gauls. Although the Celtic language or languages spoken in Gaul is predominantly known as Gaulish. The name Gaul is derived from the Old Frankish reflex of Proto-Germanic *Gaul has, foreigner, Romanized person, an exonym applied by Germanic speakers to Celts and Latin-speaking people indiscriminately, making it cognate with the names Wales and Wallachia. The Germanic W is regularly rendered as G in French, and the diphthong O is the regular outcome of L before a following consonant. Gaul or Gaul cannot be derived from Latin Gallia, since G would become J before A, and the diphthong O would be unexplained. The regular outcome of Latin Gallia is J in French, which is found in several Western place names. Also unrelated in spite of superficial similarity is the name Gael. The Irish word Gaul did originally mean a Gaul, i.e., an inhabitant of Gaul, but its meaning was later widened to foreigner, to describe the Vikings, and later still the Normans. The dichotomic words Gael and Gaul are sometimes used together for contrast, for instance in the 12th century book Cogad Gadel re Galabe. History. Pre-Roman Gaul. The early history of the Gauls is predominantly a work in archaeology, there being little written information concerning the peoples that inhabited these regions, and the relationships between their material culture. Genetic relationships and linguistic divisions rarely coincide. Before the rapid spread of the Lateen culture in the 5th to 4th centuries BC, the territory of eastern and southern France already participated in the Late Bronze Age Urnfield culture, out of which the early iron-working Hallstatt culture would develop. By 500 BC, there is strong Hallstatt influence throughout most of France. Out of this Hallstatt background, during the 7th and 6th century, presumably representing an early form of continental Celtic culture, the Lateen culture arises, presumably under Mediterranean influence from the Greek, Phoenician, and Etruscan civilizations. spread out in a number of early centers along the Seine, the Middle Rhine and the Upper Elbe. By the late 5th century BC, Latin influence spreads rapidly across the entire territory of Gaul. The Lateen culture developed and flourished during the late Iron Age in France, Switzerland, Italy, Austria, southwest Germany, Bohemia, Moravia, Slovakia and Hungary. Farther north extended the contemporary pre-Roman Iron Age culture of northern Germany and Scandinavia. The major source of materials on the Celts of Gaul was Posidonios of Apamea, whose writings were quoted by Timagenes, Julius Caesar, the Sicilian Greek Diodorus Siculus, and the Greek geographer Strabo. In the 4th and early 3rd century BC, Gallic clan confederations expanded far beyond the territory of what would become Roman Gaul, into Pannonia, Illyria, northern Italy, Transylvania and even Asia Minor. By the 2nd century BC, the Romans described Gallia Transalpina as distinct from Gallia Cisalpina. In his Gallic Wars, Julius Caesar distinguishes among three ethnic groups in Gaul: the Belgi in the north, the Celta in the centre and in Armorica, and the Aquitani in the southwest, the southeast being already colonized by the Romans. While some scholars believe the Belgi south of the Somme were a mixture of Celtic and Germanic elements, their ethnic affiliations have not been definitively resolved. One of the reasons is political interference upon the French historical interpretation during the 19th century. In addition to the Gauls, there were other peoples living in Gaul, such as the Greeks and Phoenicians who had established outposts such as Massilia along the Mediterranean coast. Also, along the southeastern Mediterranean coast, the Ligures had merged with the Celts to form a Celto-Ligurian culture. In the 2nd century BC, Mediterranean Gaul had an extensive urban fabric and was prosperous. While the best-known cities in northern Gaul include the Biturigian capital of Avaricum, Cenabum, Autricum and the excavated site of Bibracta near Autun in Saône-et-Loire, along with a number of hill forts used in times of war. The prosperity of Mediterranean Gaul encouraged Rome to respond to pleas for assistance from the inhabitants of Massilia, who were under attack by a coalition of Ligures and Gauls. The Romans intervened in Gaul in 125 BC, and by 121 BC they had conquered the Mediterranean region called Provincia. This conquest upset the ascendancy of the Gaulish Arverni peoples. Conquest by Rome. The Roman proconsul and general Julius Caesar pushed his army into Gaul in 58 BCE, on the pretext of assisting Rome's Gaulish allies against the migrating Helvetii. With the help of various Gallic clans he managed to conquer nearly all of Gaul. While militarily just as strong as the Romans, the internal division between the Gallic tribes guaranteed an easy victory for Caesar, and Vercingetorix's attempt to unite the Gauls against Roman invasion came too late. Julius Caesar was checked by Vercingetorix at a siege of Gergovia, a fortified town in the centre of Gaul. Caesar's alliances with many Gallic clans broke. Even the Aedui, their most faithful supporters, threw in their lot with the Arverni. But the ever-loyal Remi and Lingons sent troops to support Caesar. The Germani of the Ubi also sent cavalry, which Caesar equipped with Remi horses. Caesar captured Vercingetorix in the Battle of Alesia, which ended the majority of Gallic resistance to Rome. As many as 1 million people died, another million were enslaved, 300 clans were subjugated and 800 cities were destroyed during the Gallic Wars. The entire population of the city of Avaricum were slaughtered. During Julius Caesar's campaign against the Helvetii, approximately 60% of that nation was destroyed, and another 20% was taken into slavery. Roman Gaul. The Gaulish culture then was massively submerged by Roman culture. Latin was adopted by the Gauls. Gaul, or Galliae, was absorbed into the Roman Empire. All the administration changed, and Gauls eventually became Roman citizens. From the 3rd to 5th centuries, Gaul was exposed to raids by the Franks. The Gallic Empire, consisting of the provinces of Gaul, Britannia, and Hispania, including the peaceful Feitscherg in the south, broke away from Rome from 260 to 273. Frankish Gaul. Following the Frankish victory at the Battle of Soissons in 486 AD, Gaul came under the rule of the Merovingians, the first kings of France. Gallo-Roman culture, the Romanized culture of Gaul under the rule of the Roman Empire, persisted particularly in the areas of Gallia Narbonensis that developed into Occitania, Gallia Cisalpina and to a lesser degree, Aquitania. The formerly Romanized north of Gaul, once it had been occupied by the Franks, would develop into Merovingian culture instead. Roman life centered on the public events and cultural responsibilities of urban life in the res publica and the sometimes luxurious life of the self-sufficient rural villa system. Took longer to collapse in the Gallo-Roman regions, where the Visigoths largely inherited the status quo in the early 5th century. Gallo-Roman language persisted in the northeast into the Silver Carbon area that formed an effective cultural barrier, with the Franks to the north and east, and in the northwest to the lower valley of the Loire, where Gallo-Roman culture interfaced with Frankish culture in a city like Tours and in the person of that Gallo-Roman bishop confronted with Merovingian royals. Gregory of Tours. Massalia silver coin with Greek legend, 5th–1 stone century BC. Gold coins of the Gaul Parisii, 1st century BC. Roman silver denarius with the head of captive Gaul, 48 BC, following the campaigns of Julius Caesar. The Gauls. Social structure, indigenous nation and clans. The Druids were not the only political force in Gaul, however, and the early political system was complex, if ultimately fatal to the society as a whole. The fundamental unit of Gallic politics was the clan, which itself consisted of one or more of what Caesar called pagi. Each clan had a council of elders, and initially a king. Later, the executive was an annually elected magistrate. Among the Aedui, a clan of Gaul, the executive held the title of ergobret, a position much like a king, but his powers were held in check by rules laid down by the council. The regional ethnic groups, or pagi as the Romans called them, were organized into larger multi-clan groups, the Romans called civitates. These administrative groupings would be taken over by the Romans in their system of local control, and these civitates would also be the basis of France's eventual division into ecclesiastical bishoprics and dioceses, which would remain in place, with slight changes, until the French Revolution. Although the individual clans were moderately stable political entities, Gaul as a whole tended to be politically divided, there being virtually no unity among the various clans. Only during particularly trying times, such as the invasion of Caesar, could the Gauls unite under a single leader like Vercingetorix. Even then, however, the faction lines were clear. The Romans divided Gaul broadly into Provincia, and the northern Gallia Comata. Caesar divided the people of Gallia Comata into three broad groups: the Aquitani, Galli, and Belgi. In the modern sense, Gaulish peoples are defined linguistically, as speakers of dialects of the Gaulish language. While the Aquitani were probably Vascons, the Belgi would thus probably be a mixture of Celtic and Germanic elements. Julius Caesar, in his book, Commentarii de Bello Gallico, comments, all Gaul is divided into three parts, one of which the Belgi inhabit, the Aquitani another, and those who in their own language are called Celts, in ours Gauls, the third. All these differ from each other in language, customs and laws. The river Garonne separates the Gauls from the Aquitani, the rivers Marne and the Seine separate them from the Belgi. Of all these, the Belgi are the bravest, because they are furthest from the civilization and refinement of province. and merchants least frequently resort to them, and import those things which tend to effeminate the mind, and they are the nearest to the Germani, who dwell beyond the Rhine, with whom they are continually waging war, for which reason the Helvetii also surpass the rest of the Gauls in valour, as they contend with the Germani in almost daily battles, when they either repel them from their own territories, or themselves wage war on their frontiers. One part of these, which it has been said that the Gauls occupy, takes its beginning at the river Rhone. It is bounded by the Garonne, the Atlantic Ocean, and the territories of the Belgae. It borders, too, on the side of the Sequana and the Helvetii, upon the Rhine, and stretches toward the north. The Belgae rises from the extreme frontier of Gaul, extend to the lower part of the river Rhine, and look toward the north in the rising sun. Aquitania extends from the Garonne to the Pyrenees and to that part of the Atlantic which is near Spain. It looks between the setting of the sun and the North Star. Religion. The Gauls practiced a form of animism, ascribing human characteristics to lakes, streams, mountains, and other natural features, and granting them a quasi-divine status. Also, worship of animals was not uncommon. The animal most sacred to the Gauls was the boar, which can be found on many Gallic military standards. Much like the Roman eagle, their system of gods and goddesses was loose, there being certain deities which virtually every Gallic person worshipped, as well as clan and household gods. Many of the major gods were related to Greek gods. The primary god worshipped at the time of the arrival of Caesar was Teutates, the Gallic equivalent of Mercury. The ancestor god of the Gauls was identified by Julius Caesar in his commentary Ida Bello Gallico with the Roman god Dispater. Perhaps the most intriguing facet of Gallic religion is the practice of the Druids. The Druids presided over human or animal sacrifices that were made in wooded groves or crude temples. They also appear to have held the responsibility for preserving the annual agricultural calendar and instigating seasonal festivals which corresponded to key points of the lunar-solar calendar. The religious practices of Druids were syncretic, and borrowed from earlier pagan traditions, with probably Indo-European roots. Julius Caesar mentions in his Gallic Wars that those Celts who wanted to make a close study of Druidism went to Britain to do so. In a little over a century later, Gnaeus Julius Agricola mentions Roman armies attacking a large Druid sanctuary in Anglesey in Wales. There is no certainty concerning the origin of the Druids, but it is clear that they vehemently guarded the secrets of their order and held sway over the people of Gaul. Indeed, they claimed the right to determine questions of war and peace, and thereby held an international status. In addition, the Druids monitored the religion of ordinary Gauls and were in charge of educating the aristocracy. They also practiced a form of excommunication from the assembly of worshippers, which in ancient Gaul meant a separation from secular society as well. Thus the Druids were an important part of Gallic society. The nearly complete and mysterious disappearance of the Celtic language from most of the territorial lands of ancient Gaul, with the exception of Brittany, France, can be attributed to the fact that Celtic Druids refused to allow the Celtic oral literature or traditional wisdom to be committed to the written letter. The Celts practiced headhunting, as the head was believed to house a person's soul. Ancient Romans and Greeks recorded the Celts' habits of nailing heads of personal enemies to walls or dangling them from the necks of horses.